Most men in the gym are building the wrong sort of physique. Not because they're lazy, and not because they don't train hard, I'm sure all of you train very hard, but because nobody ever sat them down and explained what actually looks good on men, and more importantly, why. So they sometimes chase the wrong things. They bulk until they're soft. They get obsessed with how much they can lift rather than actually how they look. They train chest and arms every week and neglect the muscles that actively create that attractive silhouette. The result is a lot of guys who spent years in the gym and still don't look quite right when they look in the mirror. This series is hopefully going to fix that. We're going to build the most attractive male physique possible, from defining what it actually looks like, which is what this video is, to the exact muscles that create it, to how to train, and what to eat to get there. And we're going to start at the beginning, which is what does the most attractive male physique actually look like? And then over the next few weeks we'll go through a muscle by muscle group with the specific exercises that you could do to train each of the muscle groups. Let's go! Before we talk about muscles though, let's talk about why certain physiques are attractive in the first place, because this isn't arbitrary. There are biological reasons rooted in thousands of years of evolution. Research consistently shows that women rate a specific set of physical traits as most attractive in men, and those traits tend to signal these same underlying qualities, which are health, strength, genetic fitness, and the ability to protect and provide. And your body is essentially a billboard of whether or not you make a good mate, whether you be able to protect them, and whether or not you're able to produce good offspring. And evolution is why people to read it for information about your biological quality. The physical traits that signal this strongly are a broad, well-developed upper body relative to a narrow waist, which is what researchers call a high shoulder-to-hip ratio, or a V-taper, which is that kind of Dorito chip look, an upside-down triangle, if you will, kind of like that. Triangles are difficult to do upside down with your hands. You essentially want to be visible, but not excessively muscular in terms of you want your muscles visible, but you don't want to be ripped to the gills. And you want a low enough body fat that the structure is visible, and crucially, proportions that make sense so that everything fits together rather than looking like certain body parts being overdeveloped at the expense of others. You don't want to look like some kind of weird science experiment that's melded different body parts together. So you've got ridiculously massive arms with little stick legs, a chest that looks ridiculous, but when you come to your back, it looks like a wet piece of paper. That would look stupid. However, this has been studied directly, and that is that the V-taper, which is that nice broad shoulders, the wide back, and that narrow waist, is one of the most consistently rated attractive physical traits across cultures and across history. You can see it in ancient sculpture, and you see it in the physiques that Hollywood tends to cast as leading men. You see it in the athletes who are considered the most physically impressive across the generations. It's not a modern invention, it's just a biological signal that your body can send, and training intelligently is how you learn to send it. So let's get specific, shall we? The most attractive male physique is not the biggest physique necessarily, it's not the leanest physique. It tends to sit in a specific zone, and understanding that zone is the foundation of everything that will follow. The benchmark most commonly referenced and backed by both research and decades of visual evidence is what's often called the Greek god physique, or sometimes the Hollywood physique. The men who consistently rank highest for the physical attractiveness across the different studies and cultural polling are not necessarily bodybuilders. They're men, I know we just said not bodybuilders, but they're men like the early Arnold Schwarzenegger, not the mass monster version, but the 1974 version, actors such as Henry Cavill as Superman, Brad Pitt in Snatch, athletes such as gymnasts and swimmers, fighters at the top of their weight class. And, that brings the question, what do these physiques have in common? Well, they have a few things in common, so let's take a look at some of those commonalities. First is that they have moderate to high muscle mass. They are very clearly muscular, but not so large that it looks pharmaceutical or disproportionate. The muscles are full and dense, not inflated. Another thing is that they have low to moderate body fat, typically sitting somewhere between 8 and 15%. Enough leanness that the structure is visible, and you can see the separation between the different muscle groups. There's definition within the shoulders, within the arms, and within the chest. The abs are also visible, at least in some good lighting, but not so lean that the face starts to look a bit gaunt, or the physique overall looks a bit depleted. They often have some other specific proportions as well, and this is the critical part. The attractiveness doesn't come from having muscle. It comes from where that muscle is and what shape it creates. But as we said, you want a nice broad upper body to a narrow waist, and that is a narrow waist relative to how broad you. So you could have a waist that's this big and shoulders out here, which is about as big as I can fill the screen. But then obviously, if your shoulders are even further out, you can have a wider waist because relative to your shoulders, it looks narrow. Basically, so if you can get your shoulders to be out here with ridiculous lats and everything, then you can have your waist not even that far. Like you can still have a big waist. So why powerlifters? They technically do have V taper, but they just look massive because their waists are huge. They've got bigger shoulders. They do technically have a V taper. Which, as we've said, it's just having a strong physique, upper body wise, in terms of being nice and broad, narrow waist, and then you want to have strong, but not necessarily overdeveloped lower body. Everything just kind of wants to be in good balance with each other. A rough target that comes up repeatedly in physique research and golden era bodybuilding is the ratio of shoulder circumference to your waist circumference. Those aesthetically rated physiques tend to sit at around a 1.6 to 1 shoulder to waist ratio. So your waist, let's say your waist is 100 centimeters, your shoulders can go to 160 centimeters wide. It's generally peak attractiveness. There'll be a bit of rounding in there as well. And that interestingly tends to mirror the golden ratio that often appears through art, architecture and nature. And that shows it's not really a coincidence, it's all down to proportions. A proportion is what separates a physique that looks impressive from one that just looks a bit heavy. So now let's get specific about which muscles actually tend to build this physique. You may be able to guess some of them, I actually did mention a couple, because not all the muscle in your body is created equal when it comes to your aesthetics. Some muscles transform from your silhouette and others are just largely invisible, so this is where your focus needs to go. First up is your shoulders, possibly the most important muscle group for male attractiveness. If there's one muscle group that does more for the attractive male physique than any other, it is the shoulders. You want a nice developed lateral deltoid, which is the side portion of your shoulder, and that will turn you into a nice wide king. They will make a t-shirt look the way you want to look, and they all create the visual impression of a broad, powerful upper body, even at moderate muscle mass. Having a nice rounded capped shoulder is the signal biggest visual difference between a physique that looks athletic and one that looks average. You can have a decent chest and reasonable looking arms, but without those developed lateral delts, the whole thing will just look narrow and a bit underwhelming. With them though, everything else will look better by association. The front delts will get plenty of work from your pressing movements, where the lateral and the rear delts, which are the ones here, from the side, that make you look wider. In terms of if you're looking from the front, it's the side delt. Okay, and the rear delts, they'll get plenty of work from your pulling movements. However, the lateral delts need direct, consistent work, and we'll begin with shoulders in next week's video in terms of the specific exercises you can do to train them. Next up is the back, which is the architect of the V-taper. The back is the second most important muscle group and the most neglected by beginners, because you can't see your back in the mirror, so most people tend to underinvest in it. And this is a serious mistake. The back is made up of a lot of muscles, so should be worked hard but also smart. If you're going for peak attractiveness, the main muscles to train in your back for attractiveness are first your latissimus dorsi, which are commonly referred to as the lats. They are the large muscles that run down the side of your back and when developed will flare outward to create that swept wide appearance when viewed from the front or from the back. Having developed lats will also make your waist look smaller by contrast, and they'll create the top of the V. Without them, there is no V taper, there's just sort of, a rectangle. You also have the upper back, which is made up of a few different muscle groups, such as your traps, your rear delts, and your rhomboids, and they'll add the thickness and give you that 3D quality that can make your physique look genuinely powerful, as opposed to just lean. A developed upper back is what makes that physique look impressive from behind, and from behind is where a disproportionate amount of physical impressiveness will be judged. So, we'll cover back in a couple of weeks in terms of specific exercises you can do. However, next up we have chest, which will give you that fullness and your structure. A developed chest will add fullness to the upper body and contribute to the broad appearance from the front. The upper chest in particular, the clavicular head of the pectoralis major muscle, is what creates the aesthetically impressive full look across the top of the chest. A chest that is developed predominantly in the lower portion can look drooping rather than full, and might get you a bit mocked because some people might think they're boobs instead of, nice pecs. Chest training is almost never a problem for guys in the gym. If anything, it often gets overemphasized. The point of this is to try and train as smart as we can to get that aesthetic physique, so we want to prioritise that upper chest development and not let it come at the expense of our backs or our shoulders. Next up we have our arms, which are the finishing detail. Arms matter aesthetically, but a lot less than most men think, and they are massively overemphasised in the average gym programme. Arms don't really give you that silhouette. They're a detail on top of your silhouette, but the silhouette is created by your back, your shoulders and your waist. That said though, developed arms do contribute to the overall impression, particularly bicep peak, which is visible when both flexed and unflexed in a nice fitted shirt. And your tricep development as well, which makes up about 2/3 of the upper arm. Obviously, tri means 3, bi means 2, they're all the muscles in your upper arm. And that is what creates arm size in general. The mistake that most men make is dedicating huge training volume to their arms while their backs and shoulders are chronically underdeveloped. Get the big muscles right first and your arms will follow. If you train the big muscles properly as well, your arms will grow anyway, because pull movements, you're going to hit a bit of biceps. Most push movements will hit your triceps, and obviously pretty much all pull movements will hit your forearms as well. Next up we have core and waist, which is the centerpiece of proportions. The waist is as important as any muscle group in this equation, and it works in 2 directions. First is to try and keep your waist tight and your body fat in the aesthetic range, and that is what creates the contrast between your upper body and your midsection. Without that contrast, the V-taper just doesn't exist, regardless of how well developed your shoulders and back are. Secondly is having a visible, developed core, particularly the rectus abdominis and the obliques, add significant visual appeal. The obliques specifically, which are the muscles that run diagonally along your sides, are what give a midsection that athletic, sculpted look rather than just being flat. Heavy compound lifts will train this core significantly, but direct and oblique work will develop the visible musculature. And no amount of ab training will make them visible if they are just covered by a layer of fat. So body fat management is a non-negotiable here. That's why people often say that abs aren't built in the gym, they're actually built in your kitchen. So diet for your waist is the main focus. And finally, for now, we have your legs, which is the foundation that most people tend to get wrong. Legs are actually quite an interesting one, and they matter more than people who skip leg day think, and they matter differently than most people actually assume. Having overdeveloped legs can actually work against the aesthetic ideal. Extremely large quads and hamstrings can make the upper body look smaller by comparison, which can disrupt your proportionality. The goal for leg training in the context of the most attractive physique possible is athletic functional development. Just do enough quad, hamstring and glute development to look powerful and proportionate. A physique that clearly doesn't skip legs, but not the exaggerated lower body of a competitive powerlifter or bodybuilder, so you don't need to get legs like Tom Platz. If you were to get legs like a different Tom Brady this time, you basically wanted to end up so your legs don't look like they are from a different person when compared to your upper body. Like you've been cut in the middle, sewn to a different person. You don't want that. However, here is the truth that no amount of training can get around. Muscle definition is only visible if your body fat is low enough to reveal it. You can have exceptional muscle development underneath, but it's covered by excess layers of body fat, none of the structure, proportionality or detail that we've discussed. That make all the stuff that makes a physique attractive, none of that is visible. For the aesthetic physique that we are describing, the target range of body fat is roughly 10 to 15% body fat for most men. At this range, your face will be lean, your jawline will be nice and defined, the shoulders and arms will show some separation, and the abs are visible or will be close to it. Above 15%, a definition will start to blur and the V-taper will lose that sharpness. Having below 10% though, and the physique can start to look a bit hard and depleted rather than athletic and full. The most attractive physique is not necessarily the leanest physique. It's the physique that sits at the intersection of enough muscle mass and enough leanness that both proportion and definition are working simultaneously. That sweet spot for most men is somewhere in that 10 to 15% range. Maybe down to 8% as well could be okay, but any lower than that you start to run the risk of your physique not quite looking at peak attractiveness. So as you may have gathered, you cannot train your way out of a bad diet for body composition purposes. Training builds the muscles, diet determines whether or not those muscles are visible. The principles here are very straightforward, even if the execution does take quite a bit of discipline, but we'll cover them in future videos as there is quite a lot to go over in terms of specific training you can do and diets you can follow. Well, basically we'll help try and assist and give as much advice as we can to help you build your ideal diet. So to recap, the most attractive male physique isn't necessarily the biggest or the leanest, it is the most proportionate to the musculature that your body will allow you to carry. Having nice broad developed shoulders, a wide thick back with that visible lat flare, a full upper chest, nice developed arms as a finishing detail, a tight defined midsection and nice athletic legs, and a body fat low enough that all of the visible structure is visible. It's a physique that signals health, strength and genetic quality. Not because someone decided those things look good, but because evolution has spent a long time wiring that response in the people around you. And the good news is that the muscles which matter most for this look respond well to training. You don't need elite genetics, you don't even need pharmaceutical assistance. You just need a clear target, an intelligently designed program and the consistency to execute over time. And that's what the rest of this series is going to give you. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on those specific muscle training videos. However, that is all for now, so I'd like to thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, then be sure to give it a thumbs up and click the subscribe button if you are new around here, and let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. That is all for now, so I'd like to thank you for watching, and we'll see you later. Peace!